Hello, creative writers. I wanted to talk to you about the assignment for this week, which is called To Tell a Story. So it's in week 7 of the Schoology folder. If you click on it, sorry, it takes a little time. You'll see there's 2 links here and the directions. So the directions are what happened, tell the story. Think about point of view. So who will tell the story? So when we tell a story, sometimes we say I, if we're talking about something that I did, we call that first person. So I went outside and I fell on the ice. We can imagine somebody watching me. So they might say, the man walked outside and slipped on the ice. Or if they knew my name, they might say, Doyle walked outside and slipped on the ice, right? That would be third person. So when we tell a story, we have to decide, are we going to tell it from our own point of view, from our experience, or are we going to tell it from a third person point of view, right? Or who's going to tell the story? You can imagine if my dog was watching me, you could imagine my dog telling the story. The guy that usually feeds me walked outside and his feet went up in the air and he landed on the ground, right? That's how my dog might tell the story. We can tell a story in a way that makes it funny. We can tell a story in a way that makes it kind of a love story. Like he was running outside because he saw his beautiful wife. He couldn't believe how beautiful he was. So he rushed outside and he slipped on the ice. We could tell it as a horror story. He heard a noise. It was growing louder. Suddenly, there was an earth-shattering scream. So he ran out the door and slipped down the ice. Right? We could tell it as kind of a scary horror story. And then we can also tell it in different ways depending on the words we use. We could try to make a song out of it. We could try to make a poem out of it. So I was talking about how to do this assignment. So that's what we're thinking about, all these different ways of telling a story. And our story is going to be about this baby. So you can see the baby is laughing, smiling, and then all of a sudden is surprised. And so we want to tell a little story. Okay. So I have 2 links here. One is an example of different ways of telling a story. So if you click on that, it'll take you to a website of a guy that wrote a book, 99 different ways to tell the same story. So, for example, this is the first way. So it's a very simple story. He's a comic book artist. So he told this simple story. He's working at his computer, and then he gets up, closes his computer, walks out of his room. He goes downstairs, and then somebody says, "What time is it?" So he looks at his watch. He says, "It's 1:15." And then he hears somebody say, "Thanks," while he's opening the refrigerator. He opens the refrigerator, he's looking in it, and he thinks to himself, "What the hell was I looking for anyway?" Okay. So it's a very simple story, and that's one way of telling it. This is kind of like third person. Somebody's watching him and telling what's happening. Another way to tell the same story is in the first person. So instead of seeing him do these things, we see what he sees. So in the first panel, he's looking at his computer, then he's looking at his hand closing the computer, then he's looking at the steps, and then he looks up when somebody says, "What time is it?" And then he looks at his watch, and then he looks at his hand as he's pulling open the refrigerator, and then he looks at the refrigerator and he says, "What the hell was I looking for anyway?" So those are 2 different ways of telling the same story. And he has, you can look at this website. He has all kinds of different ways. These are all telling the exact same story, but in different ways. So your assignment, to click on here, how will you tell the story? It'll ask you to make a copy. So it always takes a long time. Okay. And the assignment is tell the story of what happened. Think about point of view, genre, style. So we're thinking about writing a little story about what happened. So you have to imagine, I went through this in class a little bit, but if you think of this baby, so the baby's laughing and then is scared, right? So we think maybe the baby must be looking at something. So we have to decide, what is the baby looking at? Right? What is it that the baby's seeing? And this is something you're going to use your creativity. Just imagine what would make a baby act like that. So you could tell the story from the baby's point of view. So the baby might say, "I was sitting in my chair, I was laughing, it was a really fun day, and then all of a sudden," and you would tell what the baby saw. You can also imagine telling it by a narrator, somebody who's watching the whole thing. So the narrator might say, I saw the baby. The baby had on a little pajamas and was playing in its chair. It was having a fun time and laughing. And then all of a sudden, something happened to make the baby scared. Okay. So those are kind of the way to think about this assignment. Um, and so you're going to decide, are you going to tell it like from the baby's point of view? You might write a sentence like, I'm sorry, if you imagine that the mom or the dad or maybe a babysitter is watching, they might say, I was in a room with my baby when, and then we tell what happened. Somebody else might say, the baby was in the room, sitting in his chair when, and explain what happened. Um, you could write from the baby's perspective. It was so funny. I was laughing, right? That's the baby telling the story. So your assignment for this is just to write a short paragraph, a few sentences, telling a story, and deciding how you want to tell the story. Will this be a funny story? So what the baby saw was funny in some way. Will it be a horror story? So the baby saw something awful. Maybe the baby sees somebody kissing, or there's a romantic story going on, right? Um, and then you can decide. You can imagine sometimes you tell your friends a story in a text, so you don't always write complete sentences. So you could tell the story that way. You could tell it as a poem, right? Those choices are up to you. And then when you're done, just don't forget to either share it with me. It looks different on your iPad. Share it with me, or put a copy in Schoology. Okay. Happy writing. See you Monday.